This week on the agenda, I'm at the World Economic Forum here in Davos to get some big ideas from small economies. The economies of China, the US and EU have dominated proceedings here at the World Economic Forum's annual gathering of more than 60 world leaders and nearly 1,000 CEOs. But what might they be able to learn from the world's smallest economies? I was joined by Helene Budliger Artieda, State Secretary for Economic Affairs of Switzerland, Ricardo Hausmann, founder and director of the Growth Lab at Harvard University, Chong Meng, the board director of Singapore's Temasek, and Tshering Tobgay, Prime Minister of Bhutan.
What Switzerland's advantage is the fact that the Swiss government heavily invests into education. And we have a unique educational system. We're very strong in fundamental research. Our companies invest a lot of their money into research and development, and some of it is very, out there. But then we're very strong in applied science as well, getting things bigger, not the big, leapfrog for humanity, but getting a product better, cheaper, lighter, better quality. Greener, of course. That's now extremely important. And we're lucky, geographically speaking. We're in the heart of Europe, large markets around us. And we've always been global. The lack of commodity, I have to say, pushed us to compete on innovation. So in that sense, pretty tough. 120 years ago, we were this poorhouse of Europe, Alpine country, not much going for us, and that pushed us to be smart. It's not like a cooking recipe. Take a spoon of that and a pinch of that. It's really an ecosystem, and I think we've also managed to work in clusters. I find it interesting that people always think of the finance center. It's an important thing. Don't get me wrong.
I did mention other sectors.
Yes, we have never deindustrialized in Switzerland. Never. It's equally important to us. Of course, cost of production is high, but that's why we have to compete on quality, on innovation, on being reliable. But for us, it's important to be as diverse as possible.
Prime Minister, Bhutan's economy is small, but some really exciting things are happening beyond things like agriculture, in hydropower and in tourism. So what are your big ideas for your small economy?
Given that just one generation ago, we were almost like a medieval society, and that's because of one big idea called gross national happiness. So our king has said that for Bhutan, not necessarily for other parts of the world, for Bhutan, gross national happiness is more important than gross national product. And by gross national happiness, it is an emphasis on the happiness and well-being of our people by balancing economic growth, which is a necessity, with social progress. So education and healthcare is completely free in Bhutan. And balancing economic growth, which is a necessity, with cultural preservation, environmental conservation, and good governance. So we are a unique democracy, as in we didn't fight for it. It was imposed by the monarch. We are a carbon negative country, the first carbon negative country, and a heavily carbon deficit. So that's one big idea that has worked, and we have enjoyed the benefits of it in Bhutan. As a carbon negative country, we are now working with other carbon neutral countries. So Panama, Suriname, Madagascar and Bhutan, during the last COP in Baku, COP29, we launched an alliance of carbon neutral countries called G0. So I think this can qualify for a big idea. The idea is to acknowledge carbon neutral countries and encourage other countries to make meaningful and quick progress towards net zero.
There's been a huge transformation in Singapore over the last 60 years. Your economy is now worth about $550 billion. What does Singapore have in place that shouts out, we're open for business?
So, of course, in the 60s, Singapore started with resource-intensive industry. Industrialization was big, trying to make the most of our limited labor and land resource. And certainly, we also do not have commodities. And in the 70s and 80s, then moving up from there to skill-based, technology-based. And it was during this time, in fact, Singapore was called one of the 4 Asian tigers, if you remember. So that went on for some time. In fact, that accelerated the GDP growth. But of course, with technology, then 1990s and 2000, it became much more about service-based and knowledge-based. But that doesn't mean manufacturing took a backseat. It's just that service became much bigger, and in composition-wise, service started to become the major GDP contributor. Now think about what that means. That means that you have to constantly be reskilling and making sure that you adapt and are capable of delivering what you are expected to do. And I think the playbook for Singapore through this entire period can be covered in 3 words or 3 thoughts. One is relevance. The world is changing all the time. It's true for us, it's true for all countries. The question is, how do you keep relevant? You've got to run hard almost to stay at pace. The second is efficiency, but yet agility. The size of our country is well known. It's only 700 square kilometers. We are 50 times smaller than either of Switzerland or Bhutan. And so that, with those constraints, you really have to make the most of what you have. So the ability to have greater efficiency, productivity, and yet be agile to change when value has shifted is very important. And the third thing is teamwork, yet inclusive growth. Now, teamwork between public and private sector is actually very key because when you have to remake, if everything is on a clean sheet and you can start a new industrial sector every time and forget the last one, that's a different thing. But if you have to remake and to transform and to build in situ, that requires people to somewhat agree that this is what we have to bear with while we go on. And in order to do this, the key tenets I would say that Singapore believes in are having a stable, open approach to trade as well as to business investments in Singapore, making sure that you constantly upskill the workforce while you're importing talent all the time, because you're always inadequate in terms of meeting the next turn of demand. And one final thing I would say is this thing called tripartism, which I think is actually quite unique to Singapore. There's a very strong compact between the government, employers, and employees, and the understanding that everybody's interest is important, that every worker matters, and that there should be progressive growth of all parties mean that it's win-win for all. And of course, then the data points prove that.
We're getting some common themes here already, aren't we, in terms of education and upskilling. Ricardo, we've heard from Singapore, we've heard from Bhutan, we've heard from Switzerland. Well, what can other small economies do to ensure that they can make themselves heard above all the noise, above the big powerhouses like the United States, like China, like the European Union?
Well, it's very interesting that, you know, Switzerland has this perception of being small, but in general, it is remarkable how small economies tend to outperform bigger economies. And it's not just in Singapore and Switzerland. Let me say, in my part of the world, Panama and, if you want, the Dominican Republic are the fastest growing countries in our region. Namibia in sub-Saharan Africa is only 2 million people, but it's growing very nicely. And you ask yourself, well, you know, you think of it, well, they don't really have a very large internal market, so it's hard to attract investment if you have a very small internal market. So, by the way, you have relatively few people, so you have a smaller kind of talent pool to pull out the superstars. So what I guess Singapore, in Switzerland, Panama, Dominican Republic, Namibia, realize that they have to tap into world talent. A lot of the storied Swiss companies got started outside of Switzerland. Even, you know, Switzerland became the haven for the Huguenots, and that's how they got their watch industry. So it's this openness to the rest of the world that allows while maintaining domestic cohesion. Domestic cohesion is a very important asset. You were mentioning, the importance of domestic cohesion. It's sometimes easier to achieve domestic cohesion in a smaller place than in a bigger place because there's bound to be less heterogeneity. But even in Switzerland, there's a lot of heterogeneity, and you've managed it with radical federalism, right? And so interesting lessons from that. And I think that, for example, I've worked on Namibia, I've worked on South Africa. You would say, well, South Africa is much more developed than Namibia, but if you ask yourself who's really moving on the green agenda, Namibia is miles ahead of South Africa. By the way, by attracting South African companies that find the domestic policy framework too inconvenient and too unstable for them to operate, so they'd rather operate in Namibia. So I think these are some of the assets that small economies bring to the table. So domestic cohesion, openness, and in both cases, Singapore and Switzerland are examples, not of the fact that they put people through school for a long time, etc., but because they have a policy of integrating the learning process to the work process. And everybody's learning from Switzerland's ability to have workers learn on the job and to certify their learnings on the job. And that's a quite unique thing. It got them to where they are technologically, but it's completely different from what the rest of the world does. Singapore has this very, very high-tech following of the labor market and the needs in the labor market so that they can adapt their lifelong training to the needs of the market. It's interesting that these things happen in these smaller economies, and I find that to be important lessons for the bigger ones.
Prime Minister, would you agree with that? I mean, we've also been hearing a lot here in Davos about the rise of the voice of the Global South, and I wonder if that's maybe helping small economies like yours cut through.
Should help, but ultimately we have to do our own work. Especially, well, all economies. Take Singapore. This is a page from Singapore's Book of Success. Nobody's going to give you a free meal at the end of the day. There are vested interests all around. This is a serious competition, growth. And the earlier you understand that nobody's going to give you a free handout. They are helping hands, yes. People might help you, like Switzerland has been very helpful to Bhutan over the years. But bottom line is you have to do your own work. You have to want to grow as a society and as an economy. So while the Global South as a bloc is being increasingly heard, it's going to be very difficult for a small economy, a genuinely small economy, to be even heard there. So we've got to get our act together.
Still to come here on the agenda, more big ideas from small economies, as we'll hear how they're approaching the threat of climate change.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to the agenda from the World Economic Forum here in Davos. And let's return now to my panel, Big Ideas from Small Economies, with Helene Budliger Artieda, State Secretary for Economic Affairs of Switzerland, Ricardo Hausmann, founder and director of the Growth Lab at Harvard University, Chong Meng, Board Director of Singapore's Temasek, and Tshering Tobgay, Prime Minister of Bhutan.
Big ideas need big investment, don't they? Singapore's Prime Minister has said the government's pro-growth and pro-worker. Are they putting their money where their mouth is?
Well, first a short answer, absolutely. I would say perhaps it's important to deal with what Ricardo put up just now as another important factor, which is social cohesion. So I think the government works as hard on social cohesion, if not harder, than the economic side. Now, of course, we are conscious of the economic side because as investors, when you get into the country, what do you want to see? But don't underestimate that factor, which Ricardo highlighted, which I will not talk too much about. But coming back to the economic side, I would say that the way the government puts itself forward is to be at every table of discussion that is necessary, either as an enabler, a promoter, a sponsor, or sometimes both. And focusing on, let's say, I would say, in maybe 3 levels, and very constructive and as well very clear and deliberate. The first level is sector transformation. So the entire economic base of Singapore is divided into 23 sectors and clustered into 7 clusters. And examples of clusters are like advanced manufacturing and trade, connectivity, so land, sea, air, human health, urban systems, including built environment, real estate, resource, environmental sustainability, modern services, including AI, stuff like that, and lifestyle, which I think we all know what that is. Now, these sectors and these clusters are then tasked to consider the future, take the externalities, and see how that sector will need to be transformed. The government's role is to listen to those inputs and come up with a joint, what we call an industry transformation map. So you can actually search for that and find that there are industry transformation maps across these sectors. And money is put to work in that, so about $4.5 billion across these sectors over the next few years. At the enterprise level, we all know how important it is to make sure that our enterprises, no different from others, we have queen bees, we have foreign big investors, and we also have quite a number of SMEs who all have to be uplifted and be able to be at the level of the game that is called for on a transformative basis. So the agencies in government, again, have lots of dialogue and take feedback. And just to give an example, like we all know the Economic Development Board, so their role would be to consider where are the gaps in terms of enablers that will ensure that enterprises are able to perform and thrive, including things like intellectual property, management, research, innovation, and so on and so on. So research and innovation is also a huge enabler that is pursuant to the ITM. So at the sector level and enterprise level, there is convergence and there's, I would say, mutual reinforcement. Finally, last but not least, then the workforce transformation. Yeah. And here, scaling is very important. But just to give an example, the Singapore government tries to listen and be ahead of the time, hopefully, sometimes. But, you can say in AI, we are all followers. But, then we set a goal to have 15,000 AI practitioners to be trained within the next 5 years. And then there's another scheme to ensure that these are available to enterprises. And then there's another theme to make sure that the broader set of workers and general public are not left behind. So all of these are important factors. And I think the government is on top of these aspects with a lot of inputs and participation from the private sector. And that's just an example of how things work.
Can I just say we have a completely different approach. No strategy on innovation, top down, no sectorial growth plan. We leave it up to the companies. And yet, I think both of us are successful. And I think that's really important because not one size fits all societies, and we have a different history than you do. We have different political systems, but everything can work.
In which case, Ricardo, how do small economies then cherry pick the best bits when they're looking to grow their economies?
Well, the small economies benefit from a rules-based world because they rely on integrating themselves to the world. Their companies realize from the beginning that they have to look at the world for growth opportunities. And so they benefit from a certain world order. So we are reminded that suddenly President Trump has somewhat of an obsession with Panama, now with Greenland. So it's important that there's a security envelope in which countries operate, and that a rules-based order means that it's not that a more powerful country dictates, but that every country's sovereignty is respected. So that's one element in the background. But I think that many countries, much of the discussion here, are struggling with what to do with internal divisions. It's very interesting that that was the obsession of the founding father of Singapore, where you had a community that had 75% Chinese and Malay and Indian, and actually their separation from the Malayan Federation was on ethnic grounds. So for them it was very important, you know, what was the slogan? One country, one nation, one Singapore, right?
Yes, quite right.
So it was achieving domestic cohesion was a very important element, to have the internal strength to face a potentially adverse world, because there was this fear that that you were going to face a relatively hostile environment. And you know, Switzerland survived 2 world wars unscathed because there was sufficient internal cohesion that generated a deterrent effect for no one to want to mess with Switzerland. So I think those are the cohesion is important for many things, like solving economic problems, but also it's important for stability in a world where it's not always rules-based.
Prime Minister, how well placed are small advanced economies like yours to tackle challenges like climate change, the fast pace of technological innovation and food security?
When it comes to issues of climate action, it gets very difficult for us. Because as a small economy, there's very little we can do. There's very little in terms of reducing emissions. We don't emit anywhere near the amount that larger economies do. So as it is, we don't emit as much, and there's very little we can reduce. Our sequestration track record is really big. So we sequester almost 3 times more carbon equivalent than we emit in terms of greenhouse gases. Therefore, we are a carbon negative country. But our entire glacial system is at risk. Our glaciers are melting really quickly, and below the glaciers we have glacial lakes, and as the levels of the glacial lakes increase, they risk what we call glacial lake outburst floods, which destroy infrastructure, livelihoods downstream. And a lot of the livelihood, our national livelihood, comes from hydropower. Now, on the one hand, hydropower is green, it's renewable, and we have a huge potential, much of which can be used to developing our country, growing our country, particularly in the area of technology. But with global warming, but with climate change, and with the risks of glacial lake outbursts, our hydropower projects and investments in that sector may not be as secure as it should be because of climate change, which we have very little to do with. Now, our voice in this matter is also, I mean, it's not in our nature to lecture to the world that we are carbon negative and therefore we should be rewarded. No, it's just common sense. We should take care of our country, we should take care of our environment, we should take care of our planet, we should take care of our future. But that said, there's very little recognition. And therefore, the alliance I mentioned earlier, G0, the alliance of carbon neutral countries, to come together and to develop our own platform to talk about the urgencies of net zero. Let's agree that there is an urgent need to achieve net zero, and then also to recognize those who are net zero. All discussions, the pledges that all governments and even corporations make during discussions is, we will become net zero, we will, it is at a future date. But those who are already net zero are not recognized. So this is an attempt, G0 is an attempt to allow for countries to achieve net zero ahead of their promised schedule and to be, if not rewarded, at least recognized for it.
Get some
Big idea.
A big idea, it certainly is. But now he's brought up something else that you have in common, shrinking glaciers.
I was thinking, I see now more things, the shrinking glacier. I think the not wanting to teach lessons, actually really when we speak, I think that's all of us, because we're small, we're not in the business of bullying anyone. We want to talk to partners at eye level. Of course, we're also hoping that we're being talked to at eye level. That's not always happening. In the case of Switzerland, I don't know if you're doing better than we do, but I think that there's a lot of things that actually, when none of us, mountain people, landlocked, a lot of challenges that we actually face together. So there is some similarity.
But then let me pick up then on something you just said about inclusivity, and how important it is for Switzerland and small economies to have that inclusive growth. That's important when it comes to attracting financial direct investment, when it comes to attracting the right talent, isn't it?
Absolutely. Switzerland, we're multicultural and we're multilingual. I think that's another thing that we share. And, you know, I speak Swiss German, that's my mother language, and we're 9 million people, and 60–70% speak Swiss German. It's not even a discussion. I had to learn French so I can communicate within my country. I cannot participate at WEF in Davos if I don't speak English, and I happen to be married to a Peruvian, so I speak Spanish. And as I said, wherever I go in the world, I meet Swiss companies that have operated in faraway continents, in faraway countries for over 100 years. So Swiss companies understand Africa, they understand Latin America, and they understand China, Asia, Southeast Asia. I was blessed today, EFTA signed a free trade agreement with Thailand. Very important for us because we want to understand Southeast Asia better. So we go where there is growth, and we have something to offer. You know, it's a struggle to negotiate free trade agreement when you're 9 million. It's an interesting market, because we have a high GDP per capita, but it's 9 million. And I had the distinct honor to negotiate and finish a free trade agreement with India. And then you sit in front of someone that offers you a market of 1.4 billion. And so what's in it for India? But I think all of us have one thing, well, I'm not sure, but the two of us have one thing in common. We're net FDI exporters. I don't have enough land, I don't have enough people in Switzerland. So I'm the most relaxed person if some of our companies, and you know, it's the large companies, household names, everybody knows them, but often more important, these hidden gem, SMEs, 300, 400 people maybe in Switzerland, but they're manufacturing around the globe and they're niche leaders in what they do. And that's fine with me because I cannot offer them, as I said, a workforce, and I cannot offer them land. So, and I think that's what we offer. And it's interesting FDI. So when you go and see a Swiss company somewhere, you will see it's run by local people. It's not run by Swiss people. The Swiss people, they rather stay back home. I need them here. You mentioned our educational system. So our companies bring the apprenticeship system to wherever they go because that's in their DNA. We pay high wages because usually we compete on quality and so on. So this is smart FDI, and it's the most natural thing. No policy, no government that says you need to do it. It's important for Switzerland. We've done it for over 100 years.
A big round of applause for our fabulous panel. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You can watch every episode of The Agenda in full on CGTN Europe's YouTube channel. And for exclusive extra content from me, my guests and the rest of the team, don't forget to check out @The Agenda Show on TikTok. Coming up on a future agenda, AI in the global south, why developing nations are looking to take the lead in a high-tech future. But for now, from me, Juliet Mann, and from all the Agenda team here in Davos, goodbye.